we had to spray this thing that would quickly disintegrate all paper. So it's gone. It's gone forever.
There's a pile on the floor now of mush.
It's just mush and dead body mush. So just what happens. If it melts paper, I suppose it would melt the coffin. Yeah.
I feel like it would.
Is it wood? Yeah,
I don't know. Wood, paper. Yeah, it's all the same, right?
Yeah.
Paper is wood, right?
But I hear they use reeds a lot now.
Reeds?
Yeah.
Like in a saxophone reeds?
Like a quick growing reed, yeah, just so that we don't have to destroy slow growing trees.
For money.
For paper, yeah.
Oh, for like this paper that I'm writing on.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's true, I didn't look it up, but it was told to me one time and I said, cool. That sounds right.
Somebody on a blind date told me the paper was made out of reeds. And I was like, cool. Never Googling again.
It was a trust exercise, I think, and I passed it. So.
You did. You're very trusting.
How'd that date turn out?
Oh, great! Actually, it was real good.
It was nice. They talk about reeds all the time.
Yep. Yeah.
Their relationship is based on reed knowledge. Oh my God, you're ridiculous.
Yeah, it is.
Oh God. So Chris, I'd love to ask you a couple questions about like your theater background, because I know that probably more than most of us, you like grew up in the theater. Like your mom was working in theater your entire childhood. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Tell me about that, because now I'm going to raise one of those kids, and I just want to make sure I don't screw them up. So tell me how to make them nice like you.
Oh, well, thank you. It was interesting. Staged theater. I feel like it's most popular like on Broadway, and then kind of outside of that, it's in academia. So that's mostly where I grew up in. As my mom was the technical director at multiple universities. What ended up bringing us to Austin is she was the technical director at St. Ed's for a few years in the mid-90s. It's just a lot of being behind the scenes a lot and seeing a lot of things, which I guess for most people I feel like would probably ruin things, like always knowing how things are done. But for me, like, I almost feel like I have to know how it's done or I won't enjoy it. So it's been a lot of like, if I see like a magician perform, I'm like, oh, well, how did he do this? You know, I have that curiosity. And I don't know, I went through a phase, to kind of go back to how you stated the question, I went through a phase where I tried to rebel from the arts by deciding I was going to be a scientist when I was in middle school. I actually went to a magnet high school for science for 2 years. I ended up leaving there not on the best terms.
Blew something up in the lab, right? That's classic.
Classic science high school situation.
Close, but not entirely accurate. And anyone who knows the story is laughing right now. And everyone else gets to wonder because it's a dark, embarrassing point in my life.
Yeah. The government made you sign that NDA.
But yeah, I was going to be a marine biologist, and I think I'm worried my mom's going to hear this, but I think I was definitely, even at that young of an age, kind of seeking stability.
Sure.
And maybe not necessarily seeing that in my growing up, because we moved a lot, because, like I said, you know, you have New York where theater's centered, and then theater outside of that. I mean, right now where we're at, and you know how we know each other through a comedy theater, is a relatively new thing, and they're springing up everywhere. It seems like not just in major cities. I think Austin's kind of grown into like being a hub of that because we have 5 of them, but it wasn't like even 10 years ago. It wasn't that common.
Yeah.
It wasn't here. There were people. It was in the mid to late 90s. My mom was the director for a festival that had an improv element. I don't remember too much about it. It was here in Austin. It was called the Mind Over Money Festival, and the only thing that I can remember that I think is even remotely still functioning from that was Blue High Machine. I could be wrong. There might be other things, but there was definitely an improv element there. But even back then, I don't really think of it as like an improv town. Like I think that was even either at the beginning of or pre-Hideout. And so, with everything being kind of centralized, and especially back then, you moved, like, if you're looking for another theater job, you have to find a different city with a different theater because there's only one option in the city you were in.
Yeah.
And so, until I was 12, it was moving around a bit, and I think, the question I always got was like, are you military? Like a military kid. And the weird part about that is I was military until I was like 6 or 7, and then my dad didn't re-sign, and we followed my mom around doing theater stuff. So and when we were in the military, it was literally just San Antonio. I think I was looking for a different path when I was a kid. That didn't last long. I got, I think, just kind of enamored with the 90s, where there was. It was pre, the technology we have now, but there was that spring in the 90s where it's kind of weird looking back on it, because in my opinion, filmmaking didn't get cheaper at that point in time, but somehow it blew up. You have like Kevin Smith and Van Zandt and all these people just coming out and doing a lot of indie film. Like, indie film was really big, even though it was still ridiculously expensive to make a film. Like, right now, the three of us in this room definitely have all the equipment necessary to make a film. We own it. Like, we wouldn't be renting equipment. We would just need people. And I made a short that I include in that the prices of equipment that I still own in that, and buying all that equipment and things. I think the most I spent was probably on food. And I still have all the equipment that I bought on that. So it's a different world, and I feel like I lost my point in there somewhere. But
you're talking about what got you back into theater after you had tried to get away from it.
Yeah.
The technological stuff, was it what made you excited about it?
Well, I got back into it. I wanted to be a marine biologist, which I oddly learned. I think it's probably, and I know they're way out of being cool at this point, but definitely they were still cool in the 90s. I think SeaWorld tricked a lot of kids into wanting to study marine sciences. Because not everyone, but I would say half the people I knew at the science school that I went to wanted to be a marine biologist. And we all had different animals we wanted to study. But
there's more ocean than there is land on the earth that we live on. Yeah. Why not want to research part of that, is all I'm saying.
Yeah, and it's definitely, still fascinating, but there were a lot of people that wanted to do that, and we're at a school that's totally trying to gear us all to go to like MIT and be engineers. So there was this real disconnect, and I think, at 14, having to get up at 5:30 every morning to be on a bus for an hour to go clear across town to a school where I didn't really know anyone, and there was this definite extra layer of outsider, because a lot of the people going to the school, I'm not sure if this is still the case, because I think schools in Austin have changed a lot, but back then there was one magnet middle school that was performing arts, or like liberal arts, and science, and then that split at high school. You could go, like, a lot of those kids chose to go to either the liberal arts school or the science school. And so coming in and to that school, having gone to a regular middle school, there was a lot of, like, well, you're not smart, because if you were smart, you would have been in middle school with us. And it was a lot of posturing and a lot of weird things, because it was there was some diversity, but not a lot. But on top of that, just like the kind of people, it was just a lot of the same types of people.
Yeah.
And so you run into this situation where there's not really cliques like you'd see at a normal school. Like, oh, there's the goths, and there's the stoners, and there's this group. It was more of like, oh, there's the pale white guys that hang out in that room. There's the pale white guys that hang out in that room. There's the pale white guys that hang out in this room, And...
not even ladies. Not even like a pale white lady. None of those.
There were some ladies.
A couple pale white ladies.
A couple of pale white ladies.
Women have been
definitely underrepresented, which is also a weird thing you mentioned, because...
Pasty chicks.
In my sophomore year, one of the classes that was definitely like an engineering class they made us take, and it had some weird name, and it was loosely based on the curriculum of a class that they were teaching at MIT, and we were on teams where we had to design like a weird Rube Goldberg device to do some ridiculous, like I think it was like there was a track and it had to knock a golf ball off of these rails, and it had to be programmable to these bins. And I was on a team, and my team was actually me and 2 women. So, I guess young women, girls. I don't know.
You're in high school?
Yeah.
You can call them girls, yeah.
But, so yeah, I mean, there definitely was female representation. And I mean, there were... It just felt white, and I think it felt extra white because the school itself is in Austin. Anyone who knows Austin kind of has a diversity problem of its own, but it's in a primarily black neighborhood. My understanding is, the school was brought there to kind of save that school just because the numbers weren't enough to keep a high school in that neighborhood. And so there were, it was like 2 different worlds. It was, the black students and the white students, or the academy students, and there wasn't a lot of mixing, as far as like even knowing other people, from one group to the next.
So in the same building,
yeah.
There was like 2 different schools.
Yeah, it was while I was there, it was a little different because shortly after I left, an incident happened where a young woman was sexually assaulted in her car, and then they totally changed it where the academy was the top floor, non-academy was the bottom floor, and there was like no mixing, and I'm like, oh, that's horrible. But I was already out of there at that point.
Right.
That sounds, unless they had, I was like, that sounds like a lot of assumptions were made. They're like, let's just divide it because clearly the people who attacked this girl were from this other school. You're like, wait a minute.
In a car, nonetheless.
You're like, wait a minute. What's going on right now?
Yeah, no, it was...
on the second floor.
I wasn't...
That car issue.
How do we fill this building with people?
I wasn't there at that point, but yeah, it was bizarre to see from, like, at that point, an outsider's perspective, for everything to get shifted so immediately, and I want to say violently, but I don't think there was, like, violence, because...
Well, it's interesting that you experienced this, like, sort of segregation in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, this is a real thing that, like, happened in your high school in the 90s.
In Austin, Texas, that seems to be a liberal city.
Yeah, that, like, seems to be super, like, it, like, touts. Because I know a couple of black people that are current, like, that are, like, lifers. They've lived in Austin their whole life, whatever. And they'll be like, oh, no, Austin's so racist. And I'm like, what? But I don't know. I mean, but I don't witness anything. I've stopped saying, like, oh, I don't see it, because, like, I don't see people being mean to me.
Yeah.
And I'm certain some people are. You know what I mean? They have to. It's ridiculous not to. So it's like, oh, okay, I think I'm just oblivious to anything. Even infractions against myself. Like, I'm like, they were so nice. They were making fun of you to your face. I was like, what? Okay.
Yeah, I've definitely been in that position.
That's so weird, though. That was a real life situation that, like, I thought for sure you were going to say, like, this school was primarily